Welcome, everyone. Thank you so much for joining our webinar today. We are thrilled to have you for a discussion on learning from a decade of college promise scholarships. My name is Elizabeth Garlow, and I'm a fellow with the Upjohn Institute's new place-based major research initiative, and we are really excited to convene this conversation today. Before we get started, I'd like to just give you all a very quick overview of the platform that we'll be using today. We will be running through some slides as our speakers offer remarks, so you can follow along with those slides. You have a chat box that should be visible on your screen, and we'd like to invite you to enter your questions for today's speakers into that chat box throughout the course of the webinar as they come to you. So if a speaker is offering remarks and a question comes to you, feel free to enter that into the chat box, and then we'll have time for Q&A at the end of this webinar with our speakers from Buchanan, Michigan, El Dorado, Arkansas, and Richmond, California, and the Upjohn Institute, so we'll get to those questions then. If we have enough time at the end, we may also be able to take your questions over audio. So without further ado, I'd like to kick off this webinar by turning it over to Dr. Michelle Miller-Adams, a research fellow at the Upjohn Institute, who will share an introduction to today's topic. So let me turn it over to you, Michelle.
Hey everybody, this is Michelle. Thank you so much for joining us today. I'm going to spend just a few minutes telling you a bit about the Upjohn Institute and our Promise research agenda, as well as the upcoming PromiseNet conference. The Upjohn Institute is a nonprofit, nonpartisan research organization based in Kalamazoo, Michigan. Our roots go back to 1932 when we were established by W.E. Upjohn, the founder of the Upjohn Company, and our mission is to understand the causes and consequences of unemployment. We have a staff of 105. Our researchers, largely economists, study and report on labor market issues at the international, national, regional, and local levels, while our operational division delivers workforce training and support in our region on behalf of the state of Michigan. At the local level, of course, we have a special interest in the Kalamazoo Promise and what its impact has been, not just on our home community, but on the nation, where dozens of other communities have been inspired to create their own Promise programs. In a few minutes, my colleague Brad Hirschbein is going to tell you about a new database analyzing these programs, but I want to mention a few other Promise-related activities here at the Institute. My colleagues and I have produced a robust body of work evaluating the Kalamazoo Promise and related programs. We've published 2 books along with multiple studies that rigorously assess the impact of the Kalamazoo Promise on everything from student achievement in high school to college enrollment and completion to housing prices and migration. And we've developed a framework for evaluating and monitoring Promise programs that is also available on our website. In recent years, we've convened scholars to engage in the first comparative research projects of Promise programs, first with funding from Lumina Foundation and now with receipt of a grant from Strata Education Network that will allow us to study the workforce outcomes of the more mature Promise programs. We've brought these activities together under a new initiative at the Institute called Promise Investing in Community. Through this initiative, we plan to continue with research and evaluation around place-based scholarships, but also contribute to the growing body of knowledge around place-based strategies more generally and how human capital investments can yield dividends for communities. Throughout, we have been central players in PromiseNet, a convening of Promise communities that will hold its 9th meeting next month. This December marks 10 years since a small group of stakeholders from around the nation gathered at the Institute for an informal discussion about how to share information. Interest in the Kalamazoo Promise and other newly created programs was so intense at the time that folks were spending a lot of effort communicating via phone and email and even traveling around the country to visit and learn from each other's programs. At that December meeting, we decided to bring a group of folks together later that year to share information and do some networking. We thought maybe 50 people would attend, but instead 150 showed up and PromiseNet was born. We've met on 7 other occasions in Denver, Pittsburgh, New Haven, Washington, D.C., and of course Kalamazoo, where we will have our 9th convening on November 6th and 7th. PromiseNet is not a typical conference. It has no staff or budget of its own. Rather, the conference is planned by a virtual committee from around the country. Our goal is to accelerate learning by bringing together people from communities engaged in this work, as well as those who are considering the creation of a Promise program in their own community. Some of the highlights of the upcoming conference are shown here. They include breakout sessions that address practical issues like how to design, administer, and market your Promise program, insight into the latest research on local and statewide Promise programs, keynote speakers who bring us best practices around serving young people, and a panel of practitioners who are doing the hard work of leveraging their Promise programs for economic change. Of course, there'll be plenty of time for informal networking, and we'll visit our local community college's culinary arts program in downtown Kalamazoo for an evening reception. You can check out the registration material at promisenet.net. You'll find that the cost of attendance is very reasonable and the resources on offer are very rich. We hope you'll join us at PromiseNet, and we're really glad you're with us today.
Thank you so much, Michelle. And I'm sure many folks that are on today's webinar are planning to be with us in Kalamazoo on November 6th and 7th. But for those of you who have not yet signed up to come, we'd love to have you to continue the conversation we're kicking off today. So now I'd like to ask my colleague Brad Hirschbein, who's an economist at the Upjohn Institute, to give us a sneak preview of a new database tool that will actually be launched at this year's PromiseNet gathering. Our hope is that this database will serve as a resource for community leaders, funders, and researchers alike. So Brad, I'm going to go ahead and turn it over to you.
Thanks, Elizabeth, and thank you, Michelle. As Michelle mentioned, along with my colleagues at the Upjohn Institute, I've helped study the impacts of the Kalamazoo Promise, and we're actually now excited that we're going to be able to look towards studying workforce outcomes in the near future. That's the next step, and we're hopeful that we can develop a framework that other Promise programs would also be able to use to look at some of those outcomes. But before I talk about the database, it's first going to be really important to define what is a Promise program. There are many different definitions out there from different organizations. In some cases, it's any college financial aid based on a city or a state that's below the national level. But we define it a little bit differently, a little bit more exactingly. We're looking at place-based scholarship programs that seek to transform communities as well as students and schools. And so as part of that, they tend to be much more localized, and for our purposes, we don't focus so much on statewide programs because we really want to see what's going on at the community level. That being said, they often include enrollment or residency requirements because they're targeted for people living in a given area in a given community. Often they are perpetual. Students need to find out about them at an early age, and so there is an element of early commitment where families and students and other stakeholders think that this is going to be ongoing, and that's where the promise in the name comes from. You think that it's going to be there down the road. But still, within all of these parameters, there's a great deal of variation in programs, and one thing that we have learned is that no Promise program no Promise programs are the same. Each one is unique, and the variation ranges from programs being first dollar, where the money comes on top of existing financial aid, to last dollar, where the money comes after existing financial aid has been applied. Programs may be available only for the local community college, or they may be available for universities statewide or even nationally. And of course, they vary tremendously in whether they are universal and open to almost everyone in an area, or whether there are merit or need or other requirements as well. So keeping that definition in mind, we have actually put together a new searchable and interactive database that contains about 90 programs that meet that definition that I just discussed. And among these 90 programs, we have collected quite a lot of information and rich detail with over about 90 characteristics for each program in the complete version, because 90 is a lot of things to show people at once. In the web browser version that you see in front of you that is going to go live soon, we display slightly fewer of them to keep things manageable, but you can see that you are able to browse, search, and filter. Just a few of those options are at the bar at the bottom of the screen, where you can select and filter to see which programs meet those characteristics. But one of the benefits of this new database is that you can actually compare programs and program features side by side. So you can see how one program will compare to another along a dimension of your choice, up to 3 programs at once. You're also going to be able to download a full version of the data set for research purposes. It will allow far more sophisticated analyses than you can get just from looking at the web version. For example, allowing you to match information about your community to the Promise program and see how the background context may vary. But in addition to those features, we've actually added two features that I do want to talk about. If we could, thank you, advance the slide. You can see the presentation on the screen in front of you of all the different, at least some of the different features that are available. But the ones at the bottom, those little speed dial-esque icons, I want to talk about those really briefly. One is saturation, which is the share of students in the community the Promise program is likely to reach based on eligibility criteria. And the other one, the intensity, is a measure of the generosity or depth of the program in terms of the eligible colleges and the value of the scholarship itself. And we want to point these out because higher values on both of these metrics are going to indicate a greater likelihood of the Promise program transforming the community through higher education. So those are things that we definitely think will add value in terms of comparing different programs and their features. One of the other things that's also available is that we've tied each program to the research available about it. So if you have a question, is there research on this program? Does it actually increase post-secondary education or enrollment? There will be a link, and it's right there in the lower right-hand corner of the screen, indicating that yes, you can actually see what has been conducted, what studies have been conducted about a given program, with the caveat that because there are 90 programs and Promise programs are still relatively new, not that many of them have yet been studied, but that will go up in time. So the database itself will go live right around PromiseNet, which is in less than 2 weeks, as Michelle indicated. Everyone who's signed into the webinar now will get a notification when it does go live, along with the URL to go check it out. So please stay tuned for that. And you can always email promisedatabase@upjohn.org with comments and suggestions. We'd love to hear them, and we will be updating the database regularly. So please stay tuned. Thank you.
Thank you so much to Brad and Michelle for that introduction and doing some level setting, and then sharing a tool that hopefully will allow, as Brad was mentioning, for a number of those of you who are signed on today to study and understand both the variation in Promise programs as well as the impact that they're having in communities around the country. So I'm now very excited to introduce our keynote speaker, if you will, today, Governor Rick Snyder. Rick Snyder became Michigan's 48th governor in 2011 and has made access to quality education a focal point of his agenda, with an emphasis on improving academic achievement for at-risk children and those facing difficult financial situations. Michigan's funding for K-12 education and higher education currently stands at a record $1.9 billion. Governor Snyder also worked to build a bipartisan coalition of Michiganders to put Detroit back on a path to success following bankruptcy. During his 2 terms, Detroit and 21 other communities around the state of Michigan have stepped up to make college more affordable and accessible for Michigan's youth through the Promise Scholarship movement. So I'd now like to invite Governor Snyder to offer some remarks with us today.
Well, thank you, and thank you for that great introduction. I really appreciate the work the Upjohn Institute's doing to promote this. It's been great to be at your event in the past. I'm sorry I can't make the session this year, but I'm happy to have a chance to speak with you on this call. I think it's wonderful about how we can share ideas, and it sounds like the new database will be really helpful. There are a number of things I could talk about, but I was going to primarily focus in on some of the things we actually are doing in Detroit, because I think it's a great illustration of a Promise program that's made tremendous progress. And again, we've learned a lot from the Kalamazoo Promise and other places around the country. This goes back to 2013, that we thought it was important as part of Detroit's comeback to do something to help the high school students have an opportunity to go to college and to get additional training. So we created a program in partnership with the Detroit Regional Chamber of Commerce that they would help administer this program for at least a fixed number of years until we continue to expand the program. And so we've been good partners. And we kicked it off with a last dollar program to really say, can we raise money from philanthropic sources and other sources to help college students get the first 2 years done with a number of local community colleges. We've made the program open to any Detroit student, whether it be the traditional public schools or a charter. And we've kicked it off, and it's been going in a very positive way for a number of years now with these 5 community colleges. We've had roughly 2,000 plus students go through the program. In 2016, we had almost 600 participate, and it's been a great experience in terms of listening to their success stories. One thing we learned through this experience that I would encourage other groups to look at, and I know many have, is when we first got started, we had probably more fallout from the program than what we would have liked in terms of students beginning but not finishing completion. Our rates have been pretty good, but we wanted to do more. So we've added wraparound services. We've raised additional funds for that for success coaches, because in many cases, it wasn't just the academic issues. There were other challenges that these students faced. And we found it to be very helpful to say, how can we help them address some of the non-academic issues so they can maintain their status, get their education, and hopefully find a well-paying job. This last year, in 2016, we expanded the program to 17 universities, both public and private universities within the state of Michigan, to allow students to be part of a 4-year program. We had some additional requirements there where they had to have at least a 3.0 GPA, some minimum score on the ACT or the SAT, and go through the process of applying to the school and being admitted. And we had a wonderful outcome so far, really for our first group. We had over 250 students participate in that. To give you some idea of how well it's gone now, it's been really exciting to see that our most accepted school, the school with the greatest number of students, was Michigan State University with 96, followed by the University of Michigan, Ann Arbor at 52. And these schools have very high standards, and it's great to see these young people getting in and being on a path to a 4-year education. And again, we're continuing the Success Coach program with these young people. The other thing that we've done is we're institutionalizing the program. That I appreciate a partnership with the mayor of Detroit and the city council there. I'd signed legislation some years ago establishing a program for promise zones for communities that would capture part of the increases in the state education tax to create a long-term funding source. And so we put that in place, and it's now in place for Detroit, that by the year 2022 or so, it should be fully funding the growth of this program, not just the rates we have today, but we're assuming strong growth in the programs in terms of more participants to include places, more places in terms of schools they can attend, and many more students, and that's on a positive path. The legislation I signed another bill just recently, increasing the number of potential promise zones to 15 within the state of Michigan. So we continue to see more progress, not just in Detroit and other places. And one of the places I know will be joining the promise program because they were waiting for this legislation is the city of Flint. And we've actually raised a fair amount of dollars to sort of seed that program, because the way I describe it is we've been raising philanthropic and other funds in the meantime, but the goal has always been to have it turned eventually over to this funding mechanism, but we didn't want to wait because it may take several years to build up sufficient funds to run the programs long term, but we don't want to see any young people miss an opportunity. So I appreciate all the support from many foundations, many other great groups that have been contributing resources to sort of bridge us to the long-term solution in terms of financial model. It's been a great experience. I know you're finding wonderful promise programs, and I look forward to finding ways we can continue to say, how do we do the right marketing to get more young people to join these programs? And then what other steps can we do in addition to success coaches or other resources to make sure they're successful? And I was excited to hear about the future database looking at kind of the work outcomes, the career outcomes coming out of this, because it's not just about getting an education, it's the opportunity to find a well-paying career that can be a great role model for others to follow in. So I appreciate the opportunity to share some of this information with you, and I'd be happy, I don't know if you're ready for questions or not, but I'm happy to continue working with you on this project. And I thank the opportunity to join you. This is great stuff, and I'm excited by it.
Thank you so much, Governor Snyder, and thanks for offering us some provocative questions to even just allow those to ruminate a little bit, and hopefully we can pick up on some of those questions as they come through. I know we have you for just a little bit more time, so I'd just like to ask attendees if you'd like to share a question over the audio before Governor Snyder has to jump off. If you could just raise the hand icon, if you click the hand icon on your webinar tool panel here, then that will alert us that we have a question coming in. So I'm just gonna give folks a quick minute to check that. Governor, we did have a question come in from Anne. It's the question is there a website to follow up on the programs that you've described? Is there any place where folks could go to get a little bit more information about some of the programs that you're talking about kind of are on their way?
The Detroit program there is. I apologize, I don't have that right with me, but before you finish your webinar, I'll make sure somebody sends it to you.
Thank you. And I should also note for attendees that we are lucky also, we have Greg Handel, who's Vice President of Education and Talent at the Detroit Regional Chamber. He's on the line with us today, and so we'll make sure we get to him during the Q&A period, and so he can give you a little bit more detail on where to find out information about the Detroit Promise.
Oh, I do have one right here for you, so you can use
Great.
that in terms of, there's the DetroitCollegePromise.com is one of the places you can go to.
Thank you. And then we have another question that came in from Rebecca. It's, could you share a little bit more about the funding mechanisms that you legislated?
Sure. We have something called the state education tax here in the state that's essentially 6 mills that goes on any kind of real estate property. And what we said is let's take a percentage of that of what growth would happen. So we sort of set a base when the zone's established to say, here's our current amount, and as the community grows and has more revenue coming in, we'll divert part of that state education tax stream to a fund that gets set aside to be used to pay the scholarships. So it's really a kind of like tax increment financing aimed at educational programs rather than traditional economic development. And that's why it can take a number of years to sort of build up, but we're seeing exciting numbers. That's with the comeback of Detroit, that number is, I think, probably going to even grow faster and better than people expected, which just will provide us more resources. So it's a funding program that doesn't take anything away from anyone, but really leverages our economic growth in our state to help provide this new resource.
Wonderful, thank you. And let's go ahead and take one more question, Governor, if you still have a moment.
Yep.
We've got a question from Justin Sheehan, who'd like to ask the question over audio. So Justin, I'm gonna go ahead and unmute you and we'll see if this works here. All right, Justin, you're unmuted. Can you hear us? All right, sometimes the audio is a little tricky here. All right, let's get back. We've got a question from Hilda, who's asking, Governor, if you could talk a little bit more in detail about Promise Zones and how those are distinct from Promise Scholarship programs.
Yeah, they actually go together in many respects. So I would say we've had a scholarship program with our Promise program. The Promise Zone is really a geography that would provide this tax increment financing as a resource to help fund the Promise scholarships. So they sort of go hand in hand, that you can have Promise programs, nice ones, Promise scholarships set up without this resource. But that's one of the things we're trying to do, is show the state is willing to make a strong investment in education and partnership. So you could do any variation. You can have straight Promise scholarship programs without this program. If you have a Promise Zone, that potentially could be your sole funding source. But I think you're actually going to find many hybrid models where we have 15 communities is sort of our pilot. Because one of the things that works well is to set the money aside for the scholarships, but then this wrap service piece is something I would encourage people to look at with other philanthropic sources, because our system currently isn't geared to handle that piece as well from the state side. Our system is really geared to help handle tuition and fees. And that's something I'd like to look at changing longer term, but I'm happy to get the bills through I've got. I'm going to keep on working on incremental improvements as time passes.
Great. Well, thank you, Governor. We very much appreciate your time and your willingness to take a few questions here before you need to sign off. And thank you for your leadership.
Great. Thank you. And have a great session in terms of your conference. Take care.
Thank you. Take care. And again, I'll just note for those who do have questions about the Detroit Promise program specifically, during our Q&A period, we'll turn those over to Greg Handel, who is with the Detroit Regional Chamber and is working on the ground with the Detroit Promise program. So next, I'd like to invite someone who's working at the local level in one of the communities in Michigan with a Promise program, as mentioned by Governor Snyder, and that's Buchanan, Michigan, to reflect on their experience. So I'd like to ask Rob Habicht, who's the president and CEO of the Michigan Gateway Community Foundation, to share with us a little bit about the program in Buchanan. Hi, Rob.
Hello, good afternoon. We are a little bit different in Buchanan here than what Governor Snyder was talking about, in that we are not a Promise Zone Authority program. We're privately funded, and our program was able to be started with an estate gift from an individual who we had some conversations with, and it culminated in a Promise program, and we're just absolutely thrilled. I've been asked today to talk about the program and a couple of the takeaways in our first year. We're only 1 year in, and we made our first distribution to the last graduating class in 2017. We rolled the program out in August of 2016 and created a tremendous amount of excitement, and the momentum has carried on and on throughout the year. Primarily, one of the things that I think is most important to us as a community, and let me just back up really for just a second. Buchanan is a small rural community in Berrien County in the southwest corner of the state of Michigan. It's almost like a foreign country to a lot of people. I can be, from here, I can get to downtown Chicago in 90 minutes. It takes me 2.5 hours to get to Detroit. So it's a little bit different. We're also about 2 miles north of the Indiana state line, so there's a lot of influence there. And I make some people really uncomfortable when I tell them that I spend my Saturdays in Notre Dame Stadium and not Michigan State or Ann Arbor. Anyway, the attitude in the town just took off. It was already a special community. We have parks, we have recreational opportunities, we have a trail, we have a great school system. But with the Promise, now we are demonstrating that we believe in and actively support our youth by helping them achieve success in their lives through the Promise program. And people have taken that and run with it. We have formed closer interaction with a wide variety of community members than we had before, including the schools. Of course, real estate profession is really interested in what we're doing. Other charitable organizations, library, theater, art center, senior center. We also have improved our relations with our 2 local community colleges, and we are blessed to have 2 right near us. So that's been a tremendous amount of help for us. As a result of the interactions, we've also uncovered and recruited amazing talent right here in our community, particularly in the area of marketing and public relations. We have professionals in that area who live here, work nationally in some cases. So we were able to put them to work as a subcommittee for marketing, and we've designed really quality materials, video productions, brand enhancing presentations, and we've been able to stay in the public eye month in and month out. As a result of lots of anecdotal stories, we were anticipating some positive things, and we were able to learn as of the October 4 First Friday count that our local enrollment went up +16 for the start of the 2017-2018 school year. That doesn't sound like a lot, but it actually reverses a 15-year declining trend for our enrollment here in the community. So it's a great start as far as we're concerned. The last part about the positive buzz is the housing market. It was already heated up here in this area, and houses were going fast. But in our community, if a house is on the market for 48 hours, it's a long time. They are just going fast, and they're going above the asking price. And we think that Promise has a little bit to do with that as well. So those are some of the positive things. In the future, we are currently in the planning and design stages of a college savings account for kindergartners. And we think that's going to be a great complement or a bookend to our Promise program. And we already have raised $150,000 toward that program, and we haven't even gotten it on the board yet. We're just talking about it at this point. And we look forward to the Promise Net conference in a couple of weeks to network with people who are doing that. There is a lot of community support for the Promise, especially among the families with children in the schools. That's a natural. One area we feel that we have an effect, though, is school of choice. We currently have been running a deficit in school of choice in Michigan, where more kids are leaving the district to attend somewhere else. So we hope to reverse that. And then finally, the last opportunity we really look forward to is annually there is a all school or all class reunion at Buchanan High School. If you've been out of school for 40 years or more, as you can tell from the picture, I'm in that group. And we have more than 500 attendees every year, and they are interested in Promise, and that is our avenue to increase that metric of funding so we can make the program bigger and meet more needs of our local students. And that is it.
Thank you so very much, Rob. I'm going to go ahead and mute you so that my echo goes away. Thank you, Rob. So we're actually now going to travel from the fresh coast of the Great Lakes all the way to the West Coast to Richmond, California. We've asked Councilmember J.L. Myrick from Richmond, which is another recently developed Promise program, actually, to also reflect a little bit on some key takeaways to date and then what they see on the horizon. Councilmember Myrick has spent his career fighting on behalf of the environment, strengthening young leaders' civic participation, and working to advance employment opportunities for Richmond residents. He was appointed to the Richmond City Council on February 4th, 2013, and in his words, considers the Richmond Promise his primary motivation and proudest accomplishment of his tenure. So we are very excited to have Councilmember Myrick with us today, and I'll turn it over to you.
Thank you, and thank you all for having me, and thank you again to everybody at the Upjohn Center and everybody with the Promise Net Conference and bringing us all together. This really is one of those type of programs that you really see cross, obviously it's crossing the country, but it crosses, philosophies and different worldviews because it's really a great way to support the youth of any community. So as the speaker said, yeah, the Richmond Promise is my proudest accomplishment. I was appointed on our city council in 2013, elected in 2014, and again in 2016. And really, in each election, I've talked about the Promise. And the reason I mention the elections is because in California, we really believe in democracy at the local level. And we've moved forward the Richmond Promise. Myself, it's really come from the city council. So myself and the current mayor, Tom Butt of the city of Richmond, when he was still a council member, our backgrounds are completely different. We come from completely different places. He's actually from Arkansas, and we're different in age, we're different in culture, but we both latched onto this idea because we knew it would be the right thing for our community. And we've seen how the community has embraced it in the time since then. So we both talked about the idea, built up support in the community for it, and then came together when we were in the process of determining how Chevron, which in Richmond is one of our biggest corporate citizens and a major employer as well as taxpayer in the city of Richmond, they were getting ready to pull some permits for a upgrade that they were doing and a modernization project. It was a major project, and we wanted to get the details worked out on the environmental side of it as well. But we also wanted to make sure that it was done in a way where the community had some benefits. And Mr. Butt and I, again, when he was still a council member before he became mayor, collaborated on handling those negotiations to make sure that we would get something for the community that was significant, not just something. So we were able to get Chevron to commit to $90 million of community benefits. The key part of that would be $35 million that we used to establish the Richmond Promise. So that was back in 2014. Since then, we've built up this program. We've got amazing executive director who many of you have met, Jesse Stewart, who's here with me now. And we've learned a lot. Today, as we speak, there are 578 students from Richmond attending 82 colleges and universities across the country with funding from the Richmond Promise. And we've learned over the course of these 2 years where it's important to not just have the money. The money is extremely important, but it also needs to be a catalyst for change within the community, for change within a school district, to make sure that students are utilizing it as best as possible, and also make sure that students are actually able to be successful once they get there. So one of the things we learned in the year one is that summer between high school and your first year of college, a lot of kids fall off. And we learned from our mistakes with that. And as a result, we were able to implement some programs. Again, Jesse was able to take leadership, create a great collaboration with the community college district. We were able to get I think a $700,000 grant from the state to help our collaborations with the community college. And what we've seen now, as we're in year two, is a 44% total increase in the amount of Richmond students not just applying for the Promise, but applying and successfully enrolling for the coming year. So again, learning from our mistakes and then using that to make sure that the program is stronger. So there's some key initiatives that we're inputting now: college awareness, the Near Peer Ambassador Program. So basically, we're working with the young people who are in college and who have gone through the program to make sure that they're developing relationships and mentorships with the young people coming after them, with the kids who are still in high school. And that's one of these things that really doesn't require extreme amount of funding, but just basically successful utilization of our most important resource, which are the very young people who are in the program, so that they can show their folks, their peers or their younger folks how they can succeed as well. Also, the high school to college transition, we talked about. The other thing that we're doing to make sure that we don't lose it is there's summer college success workshops that we've been able to implement this summer. And so the Richmond Promise implemented the college transition program in the spring and summer of 2017 in response to the summer melt that we saw the first year. 85% of the scholars for this year attended these workshops, which included completing required paperwork, connecting students to point people for summer assistance, college student panel, building the Richmond Promise scholar community, and resources and information for a successful transition into and through their first year, namely how to interpret their financial aid award package, and some basic financial literacy, which, if you think of any of us at 18 years old, right, it's something you need. So there's a lot more that I could talk about. I can keep going and going, but I think I'm just going to close up, and I'm happy to answer questions when we get to that segment. But really just want to stress how really local communities who control their own destiny, are able to know what their community needs. I knew that we needed a program like this because I grew up in Richmond and I saw the lack. I saw the difference between, myself and my friends who were never less, I was never really that much smarter than them. I just had opportunities they didn't have. And so I wanted to make sure that our entire community had those opportunities. And the Richmond Promise, that's essentially what we were pushing. The community has embraced it. And really, that's why we need local control. We need local communities to control their own destiny, elect their own elected officials, and make sure that they can hold those people accountable when they make bad decisions, whether those decisions have to do with education, water, or whatnot. and reward them when they make good decisions like this. So thank you, and let's all keep working together to make these programs successful.
Thank you so much, Council Member. And I'm just going to remind folks that as questions come up, you're hearing from these different Promise programs around the country. So they have different approaches to funding, to college success, to transition programs, as the Council Member was mentioning. So if you have questions and want to dig in a little deeper on any particular one of those, feel free to type that into your chat box. Also, some of our speakers have been sharing website resources, online resources, so that if you wanted to, you could go and browse a little bit further to learn more about these programs. So again, I want to thank the council member for those remarks. And then I'd like now to introduce our final community testimonial, if you will, which is from El Dorado, Arkansas. I'd like to introduce Allison Parker, who will be representing the El Dorado Promise, which was introduced in 2007 when Murphy Oil Corporation offered $50 million to create a Promise program for the graduates of El Dorado High School. The program continues today, 10 years and over 2,000 graduates later. So while we have programs that are just getting off the ground, we also have with us today El Dorado, who's been at this for a decade. And Allison, who works for Murphy Oil as the manager of global communications, works closely with the program and brings a different perspective being on the funder's side. So I'm going to turn it over to you, Allison.
Thank you, and thank you for inviting the El Dorado Promise to be a part of the webinar today. I certainly have enjoyed it up until now. It is so exciting for me to get to be a part of our Promise program. I love hearing the stories of how the El Dorado Promise has made an impact on students, as well as the impact these other programs are having in their communities. Over the course of our program, we have learned a great deal, but I think the things which are the most interesting to me are those things which occurred perhaps as a result of the Promise, but they were not necessarily the main objective of Murphy initiating the program. Our program has helped create a college-going culture in our district. We start on the first day of kindergarten talking to our students about where they will go to college. Our group of Promise people, which includes Sylvia Thompson, the Executive Director of the El Dorado Promise, as well as representatives from the El Dorado Education Foundation, which, by the way, is another unique thing about education in El Dorado. They are a great partner with our school district. This group goes into every kindergarten classroom on the first day of school and gives each child a backpack with the Promise logo on it and talks about what it means to go to college. So we start instilling in those kindergartners on day one that they will have the opportunity to go to college. Additionally, Wednesdays are college t-shirt days, and students and teachers wear college t-shirts, which just gives the teachers an opportunity to have those conversations with their students. And we also have all school personnel post signs outside their doors indicating where they went to college, just so all of the students know that everyone that they interact with every day went to college and they can ask about their college experience. We have Promise scholars return to the classrooms of the underclassmen and talk about what college is really like. And we have found that hearing from their peers, those students who just a year or two earlier were walking the halls with them, has a huge impact on those students who are about to graduate. It gives them an opportunity to hear a different perspective on college. And I have heard teachers say that before the Promise, or when they were in other districts, they would talk with their students about if they go to college. But with the Promise, they can talk about when you go to college. And they can have those conversations very early, even junior high or middle school, because every child can go to college. Along with creating that culture, we have upped our game in the classroom to make sure students are prepared. Our students wanted it, and the district met the challenge of providing more rigorous curriculum, more AP classes. We've doubled the number of AP classes we're able to offer. And we have more students enrolled in AP classes, including more minority students and socioeconomically disadvantaged students. We've been recognized by College Board for our increase in the number of socioeconomically disadvantaged students enrolled in AP classes. In May of 2007, which is just after the Promise was announced, we administered 275 AP exams. And in May of 2017, we administered over 900 AP exams. And I believe this is because of the culture we have instituted in our district. College can be for anyone who wants to go. And if you want to go, you need to prepare yourself in high school by taking these AP classes. Another byproduct of the Promise is community support. And Rob mentioned the support his community has seen with the announcement of their Promise, and we have certainly felt it here in El Dorado as well. When we announced the Promise, it was overwhelming, really, how our community rallied around the program. A local bank jumped on board to begin sponsoring Academic Signing Day each year, and another bank sponsors the backpack program for the kindergartners on the first day of school, which I mentioned earlier. and countless others have stepped up and supported our efforts through various initiatives and programs. I think the Promise served as a catalyst for what is now a great support system within our community. And related to that, I believe, is economic development, but I'll wait and talk more about that at PromiseNet. I'll do another plug for PromiseNet here. There will be a panel discussion on Tuesday about economic development, and we can discuss more in depth about how Promise programs help with that at that time. Now, ideas of where we go from here. As I mentioned, we just celebrated our 10th anniversary of the El Dorado Promise this year, and we're excited that the program is continuing. We are continuing to send kids to college. One thing we keep seeing, however, is the number of kids going to college who are not completing college. And this has been mentioned on the webinar earlier today. The purpose of the Promise program is to get students to college, to take away the financial burden so college is accessible to everyone. But we know that there's a lot more required to be successful in college than just being able to pay for it. We are interested in ways to help students not only get in, but to stay in and be successful and complete their degree. So one of the things we're interested in moving forward are in-college mentoring programs. Governor Snyder mentioned some ideas their programs are implementing, and I'm very interested in that. As a representative of the company which funds our Promise, I'm interested in that because we don't just want to get the kids to college, we want to get them through college. And the goal is obtaining the degree and getting the job and contributing to society. We must figure out what mechanism needs to be put in place to support these students once they are there to improve retention and graduation rates. I'll be facilitating a session at PromiseNet about this. It's entitled In Pursuit of the Completion Agenda for those attending PromiseNet. It will be during the third breakout session on Tuesday afternoon. And I offered to facilitate that session because I'm very interested in discussing ideas about how to do this. And I've just learned through today's webinar that other programs are dealing with this same thing. And I feel like it's certainly a universal issue, but I feel like people will come with great ideas. And perhaps during PromiseNet, we can discuss those and we can all take away the learnings that other programs have had. Sylvia Thompson is on the call with us today, and she's the Executive Director of the El Dorado Promise. She's an employee of our school district, and her office is right there at our high school where she can interact with the students every day. She manages the day-to-day work of the Promise, and Sylvia and I are both happy to answer any questions that we can for you. That's all I have. Thank you.
Thank you, Allison. And we're really looking forward to your session at PromiseNet. It's great to have this little bit of a sneak preview, even with some of our speakers that we'll have at PromiseNet. So we are now going to move into Q&As. I want to thank all of our speakers for being really concise with their remarks, because often on these types of webinars, you run out of time for questions. And so I'm so grateful that you allowed for some time for discussion. So we're going to go to our audience. And again, I'd like to ask, we've had quite a number of questions come in over the chat box, and so that's great. Like before, if you have a question you'd like to share over audio, please just go ahead and raise that hand icon so that we can get to you and keep this as interactive as possible. So we'll start with some questions that have been coming in over the chat box, and I'm going to go ahead and unmute our panelists here. So we have a question that came in for, I believe this would be for Brad, and the question is, with the Promise database, how can you compare programs side by side? So it seems like, you explained how you could research programs individually, but can you do kind of cross program analysis?
Sure. So the comparison allows the user to look at up to 3 programs at once. And because the features are going to be aligned in the browser, you can actually see how they differ across 3 programs of your choice. So this is, again, more of a superficial overview. Clearly, comparing just 3 programs when there are 90 of them isn't really going to allow you to fully analyze things just in the browser. It wasn't really intended for that. It was designed to give a quick glimpse if you have one program in mind and you want to compare it to another that may be a benchmark or another that has a community that has similar context to your own. This would allow you to actually see how they vary, if they vary in specific ways, if there are key features that distinguish them. One may have merit requirements, the other may not, for example. And you can also get some contextual information about the communities. If you want a more sophisticated analysis where you're going to be comparing multiple programs at once beyond just the 3 that are enabled in the web browser, that's what the full version of the data set is for. That you can download and work with it in Excel, or if you have access to a statistical software package, you can load it into that. and that would allow you to do more sophisticated and comprehensive analyses.
Thank you, Brad. I should mention we had 3 questions come in asking if there will be a recording of this webinar made available. And yes, we will be circulating a link, so you can rest assured that you can revisit the content as you like. We have a question from Michelle, which is for you, Councilmember Myrick, and that is, how can you tell us about samples of some of the activities that you did in Richmond for this summer melt?
Yeah, so I'm here with Jessie Stewart, who's the director of the program, and she could probably give you more specifics about. I know the main thing were these workshops that I discussed, and there was about 6 or 7 different workshops that happened over the summer. So Jessie Stewart, who's the director, is going to tell you a little bit more about that.
Yeah, sure. Hello, everybody. So as Councilmember Myrick mentioned, one of the key early learnings that we've had with Richmond Promise is that the scholarship is a really powerful catalyst, not only for collaboration with our institutional partners, but also a powerful carrot, if you will, for student participation. So in our second year, recognizing that we had an opportunity to provide further support for our students to successfully enroll full-time and on-time the fall after their senior year, we rolled out a series of college success workshops, so 6 over the summer, that were mandatory requirements as part of the scholarship. And as Councilmember Myrick described, we built in, it was about a 3-quarter day session. We built in different sessions around interpreting financial aid award packages, filling out their scholarship paperwork, financial literacy session, and connecting to networks on campus. We hosted these at the City of Richmond and at our local community college, which was also has been an incredible partner for us. And so the other piece of that, along with the college success workshops, which were in-person supports, we launched a series of kind of digital reminders around key deadlines for our students. So we use text messaging a lot. We know that email is something that our students need to learn to read and answer on time, but text messaging proves to be very successful. And then again, with our partners at Contra Costa College, we rolled out a summer bridge and first-year experience for our 2-year bound students that are attending our local community college, which is this year in total over 100. So that included a week-long summer bridge that focused on math called Math Jam, and then they enroll into a learning community first and second semester with targeted advising and counseling.
Great. Thank you, Jessie, for sharing some more detail on that program. We have a question for Rob. The question is, what did it take to get groups in your community to rally together to launch the Buchanan program? And since you're a smaller community, have you had to rely on organizations and resources from outside?
The buzz that was created started with a really nice designed kickoff program that we had. We expected 100 visitors. We were hoping for 100 visitors. We had almost 300. That right there tells you the kind of excitement that we had. We're about 3,500 as a community. It was bankrolled by a local bank to pick up the costs, so we were able to do quite a few nice things and have materials ready and have a video and have lots of dignitaries present, and we just did it as highfalutin as we could, I guess, and it has generated from day one a lot of excitement, and the momentum has just stayed forever throughout the year. I think continuing that, because we were able to find these professional marketing folks, we've been able to target certain groups that we wanted to make sure we approached and had lots of conversations with. So we've been able to, to pretty much go where we needed to go and get the kind of support we need to get. Locally, with the 2 community colleges, we had 85 eligible students in our first year out of a class of 97, which we thought was pretty high. Didn't expect it to be quite that many eligible, but it was. And almost half of them are going locally, which we think is great. We're happy about that. We're also not limited to anything else. You can go to any college you want. We made a decision early on not to make decisions for the family about where they wanted to send their children to school. So they can go anywhere they want and use the money. But we're happy to see that half of them are staying local, and it makes a lot of sense.
Great. Thanks, Rob. This next question is for Allison and Sylvia, and I think we can actually broaden it a little bit. So it's from Ron, and he says he's unable to make PromiseNet this year to hear that your economic development panel. So he is wondering if you can briefly comment on whether you have data to show an impact on as far as economic development in the community is concerned. So maybe we can start with that, and then maybe just broadening it also nationally. Brad, if you have any interesting anecdotes or remarks you want to make about sort of workforce outcomes and economic development more generally. So why don't we start with Allison and Sylvia?
This is Allison, but I invite Sylvia to jump in. We're not in the same room, but I certainly invite her to jump in. The community of El Dorado has really been transformed over the last several years. At Murphy, we don't say that the promise is the sole reason for that, but I will say that when we announced the promise, again, our community really jumped on board with it. We passed a tax to build a new high school a couple of years after that, after the promise was announced. Our most recent development is the Murphy Arts District, which is a huge thing in our downtown. They're really redeveloping our downtown. We have a fabulous downtown, but they've added a great arts district that has an amphitheater and several stages. And we had our grand opening for that the end of September, and we had, I don't know, Sylvia, you tell me how many different acts we had of just national entertainers came in, and we had, I don't know, we're a community of 18,000 people, and I think there were 25,000 people in our community that weekend for our grand opening of the Murphy Arts District. And that was phase one. There's more to come with that. We've seen businesses come in. We have lost some businesses over the last 10 years, but we've seen our population stop declining, as someone else mentioned earlier. And communities in the southern part, we're in the very southern part of our state, and communities in this part of the state the population has been declining pretty rapidly over the last several years, but El Dorado has kind of stopped after all of this had started. So we have seen a lot of growth, and we anticipate a lot more, especially with the Murphy Arts District coming and different things coming in our community. I'll pause and let Sylvia add anything she wants to add. I will say that at PromiseNet, we will have more actual data to share about our community. I just haven't pulled all that together yet.
We still have a week or so to get ready for PromiseNet, and that's what we're
right,
planning on doing then.
All kinds of time.
I just will echo Allison's thoughts, and that when the promise was announced, it was really a rejuvenation of our community. And within months, we passed a millage to build a new high school. We built a new conference center. Both of those things were passed with like a 75% pass rate, which is unbelievable for a tax increase of any kind. So the community has really jumped out and supported. Our population has kind of declined and now is in a steady hold. Our school district. And I think it was Rob that mentioned talking about the school district, and very definitely we had seen a declining population in our school district for many years. After the promise was announced, not only did we stop the decline, we went up a little bit. We've leveled out, and our research has shown that in surrounding areas and districts like ours in Arkansas, that decline would have had continued if it had not been for the El Dorado promise. So has been a wonderful adventure here in El Dorado, and with the Murphy's Arts District, we're excited for even more opportunities.
Thank you both. We have several questions that we won't quite have time to get to today, and so I apologize that we won't have a chance, but it's great to know also that there's significant interest here in some shared peer learning across Promise programs, so we will take note of that. To close out, I think we have time for just about one more question, and it's a question about ongoing analysis and research of Promise programs, so it seems appropriate for the Upjohn Institute to chime in here. The question is, how will the database information, will the Upjohn Institute continue to update it so that it will reflect the various Promise programs' persistence and success rates? So Sam, hopefully that does justice to your program. And then to combine it with another question, how can we get a sense of how these programs are doing overall as time goes on without just going to everyone's website? So is there an effort to sort of compile a kind of national account of promise programs around the country? So Michelle and Brad, I might kick this over to the two of you.
Brad, do you want to jump in, or?
Well, in terms of keeping track of all the programs and having a national database of the results, I think, Michelle, you're probably the best one to address that going forward. But I will say that the database, we do plan to update that regularly. Certainly for minor corrections or alterations, we're going to do that on an ongoing basis. But we do plan to do substantive revisions to it on at least an annual basis, probably more often than that. Every few months or so, as more promise programs grow, and adjusting some of the fields as contexts change. Many of them, the features or the requirements or the benefits, they do vary over time depending on shifts in priorities and resources of the communities. So those are things that we've already had to deal with and will continue to deal with as we update the database. But in terms of the longer term outcomes, yeah, we definitely are planning on doing that. Michelle and I and some of our colleagues and other researchers have been working for quite some time to develop a framework for how to do these evaluations across communities when the programs do vary so much. So we are very much invested in that, and it may be possible to do a kind of a meta-analysis where we do try to look at the different effects of the programs. But because so many of them are so different, it's hard to say and boil that down to, on average, promise programs are doing well and having an effect on post-secondary enrollment or job growth because we don't know what about the programs or which programs are actually driving those results. So there's a lot of nuance there, and we're still trying to, collectively as the research community, is trying to grapple with it. Michelle, do you have anything to add?
I want to add two things. Brad and I are obviously in different rooms as well, although I can see his office from here. But Brad, there are two places where I would suggest that you go if you want to get kind of a high-level overview of what we know to date about promise programs. They're both available on our website, and I hate to be the kind of person who mentions something I wrote, but I did publish a book, a little ebook that is downloadable for free 2 years ago called Promise Nation, and there's a chapter, 2 chapters in there that basically say, what do we know so far? So it's a little bit out of date, but it is a good kind of one-stop 15, 20-page read about the state of research in the Promise community. And then also on our website are PowerPoint presentations from the last 2 years plenary sessions at PromiseNet, 2016, 2015. We will also, of course, have 2017 up there. And one of the things we do in the research plenary at PromiseNet is really bring together kind of a high-level state of the research report. And you can access those PowerPoint presentations on our website.
Great. Those sound like wonderful resources. So with that, let's go to the next slide and we'll bring this webinar to a close. So I just want to remind everyone that we still have 1 week left to register for the PromiseNet gathering in Kalamazoo. So we hope that you're able to join us for what promises to be a thought-provoking and fruitful couple of days. And then finally, if you do want to stay in touch and follow the work of the Upjohn Institute in this area of promise programs and community development research more broadly, then we hope you'll stay in touch with us online. Here's information about our website, our Twitter, our Facebook, so we hope to interact with you there. So thank you again to everyone for joining us today. And with that, we will bring this webinar to a close, and I wish you all a wonderful rest of the day. Thank you for joining us.